I'm Travis Bader, and this is the Silvercore Podcast. Join me as I discuss matters related to hunting, fishing, and outdoor pursuits with the people and businesses that comprise the community. If you're new to Silvercore, be sure to check out our website, www.silvercore.ca, where you can learn more about courses, services, and products that we offer, as well as how you can join the Silvercore Club, which includes $10 million in North America-wide liability insurance to ensure you are properly covered during your outdoor adventures. Today I'm joined by a modern-day warrior, retired RCMP Sergeant Major Seb Lavoie, who DM'd me the rather intriguing message: "I'm about to change the face of leadership and policing in the country. Do you want the scoop?" Seb, welcome to the Silvercore Podcast.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Good morning. Wow. So for the listeners, and you've been doing a few podcasts recently. I've been watching the progression over the last couple of years of the podcasts that you've been doing. You've got a very interesting background. You've probably told it a large number of times now, but would you like to give a quick thumbnail just so the listeners have an idea of who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Seb Lavoie. I recently retired from the RCMP after 20 years. I spent the majority of that in tactical units, either in a covert capacity or on the Lower Mainland Emergency Response Team, which is a full-time tactical unit here in Canada and BC. It's now referred to as the Integrated Emergency Response Team because there are a few municipal departments that are a part of it. And I spent 13 years on the team, 7 years as a team leader. 2019, moved on to become the Divisional Sergeant Major for the province of British Columbia and retired 2.5 years later.
Wow.
On top of my, as far as I was going to go.
Wow. So very storied career. Mm-hmm. And, you know, some people might look at this and say, "Man, this guy must have horseshoes. Look at this. He goes through depot, and I think you were stationed in Tofino to begin with. Mm-hmm. Beautiful place. Do you surf?
I do not.
Oh.
Yeah, I do not. I had, I tried while I was there, and I had a near drowning experience. And really, to be honest, we just didn't have the time at the time. The numbers just weren't conducive to us having the ability to kind of go out and really enjoy the outdoors. It took me years to go back there and really look at it and go, man, what have I done?
Near drowning experience. Was that just swimming or out there surfing?
Surfing.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it can.
I got a few of those, actually. I have another one diving and one surfing. So,
really?
Yeah.
I've had a couple near drowning experiences, and it's not quite what most people, it's not how you would imagine a drowning experience. When you actually start to drown, it's actually rather relaxing. There's, I don't want to say panic about it. Maybe there is organized energy to try and stay afloat and not go under. But once the oxygen starts to deplete, and it feels like anyways that you're inhaling the water, things get a little bit calmer. I don't know if you had the same experience.
I wasn't quite that close, no. Thankfully.
Thankfully. Well, I guess where I was going with that was, well, some people might say that you have horseshoes because you're deployed in these great places and you've had a very storied career and some very interesting deployments. I look at this as something that you've strove for, that you've worked very hard for. And while there may be an element of luck somewhere along the way, that's only because preparation and all the prior planning that you put together kind of fell into place. And now, as a retired Sergeant Major, you have started a new company, Raven Strategic. Can you tell me about this?
Yeah, correct. This is evidently a work in progress now, but what it is now and sort of the bulk of what I'm doing is leadership sort of. I have 3 modules, so 3 different modules. So one of them is a leadership introspection, and this is very, very recent here.
Right.
One of them is essentially a leadership introspection, where we go in, whether it's in a police environment or in a corporate environment, and essentially use my experience in dealing with critical incidents where consequences are dire, and how the leadership is held to the fire, so to speak, all along the way as they are developing, to go and assist other leaders in looking inwards instead of, when assessing their own leadership, instead of looking out and deflecting and disabling and having an ego. So what we are doing is basically, what can you do today to make your leadership better without waiting for anybody to inject in your world and provide you with some tools, right?
Very cool.
Yeah, and so that's one part. I also very, very sort of passionate about anything that has to do with combatives and combative tactics. For those that don't know, obviously, police defensive tactics or martial arts, so to speak, but in the context specifically of whatever business or police force or unit I'm dealing with. So that's one of the parts that I simply kept because I just love doing it.
Well, you've been doing that since, what, 3 years old?
Yeah, it's been a long, long time, yeah.
3 years old, and you got into, and you started martial arts, or was it jiu-jitsu immediately at 3?
No, I started martial arts when I was 3, and it was traditional martial arts, and for everybody's pleasure, it was kung fu, right? So,
hey, there you go. Nothing wrong with that.
No, absolutely. It was a step in, and it taught me a bunch of valuable lessons that I carried over with me along the journey, and eventually sort of went into more of the Muay Thai stand-up striking, and it eventually ended up in Jiu-Jitsu, which was about 2007.
Okay.
So in 2007, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu became my primary focus.
Right. Why was that? Was that because of Hoist Gracie and all the...
100% it was. Yeah. I mean, in 93, evidently, when UFC started, we actually got to see what truly worked and what didn't, and it was no longer theoretical. Before that, there was a ton of theoretical axe to grind about every single, style and who was going to beat who, and everything was just essentially opinions.
Right. That was when Aikido reigned king, because Steven
Sure.
Seagal was on the big screen, right?
Yeah. And to be honest, he was pretty awesome.
Yeah. I can't deny...
He's a weirdo, but...
he is definitely an interesting individual, but I can't deny I probably watched every one of his videos up until a certain point.
900 times.
Yeah, exactly. Rewind, pause. How did he do that move?
Yeah, I was a big Seagal fan myself as well.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Favorite movie?
I would say probably Above the Law.
Yeah? That was his first one, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah. And then I really liked, what's the one with the twins again? Jamaican twins.
On Deadly Ground.
No.
Oh, no, Hard to Kill.
Hard to Kill.
That's right.
Yeah. So good.
Everybody want go heaven, nobody want dead. That one?
So good.
Anyways, we digressed a little bit.
I like you already.
Yeah. So with the martial arts background, had a little bit of martial arts as well. Did Kyokushin karate as a kid, and I hated it. I've talked to other people who got into that, and they absolutely loved it. Maybe it was my mindset. Maybe it was the group I was with, but I wanted nothing to do with it. Later on, I got into Arnis and jiu-jitsu, and I did some Aikido, and because of the Steven Seagal stuff, and some Muay Thai, and I found a great deal of value to the stand-up work and the physical conditioning, the cardio work, and all the rest for the Muay Thai, and I really enjoyed the Arnis, actually. It was something I did for quite some time. But there were lessons that people can learn in martial arts that are very applicable to policing and applicable to business. Is that where you're drawing some of your leadership training, or are you primarily leaning on what you learned through your career with the RCMP?
Mm-hmm, yeah. Well, my leadership journey started long before that. There was a stint in the military, and then it rolled right into, being at the academy where I was in charge of my troop, and it rolled into leading use of force programs, for the West Coast, and then it just, so there's a long kind of tracking history there. But you are absolutely correct when you're saying that martial arts have the crossovers, so to speak, are undeniable, right? And But in terms of the environment or setting up an environment, like that is critical for any gym or martial arts studio, and we see it over and over again how this is being failed, and the people that are going in to attempt a martial arts or to do what everybody else is doing that seems to be so great, and then they have a bad experience or a negative experience, and next thing you know, it turns them off forever, martial arts, right? So
Right.
as martial arts studio owners, which I'm one of them, we have a great responsibility in representing the martial arts world and whatever style that we are teaching, and be the ambassador, and know that if somebody comes to you and they're treating they're received welcomed in a family environment with the respect and all these other things, along with the professional instructions. Eventually, if they move on, they go somewhere else, they carry that along with them. Versus, this is a wrap. I've tried it, didn't like it, done.
Right.
One and done.
You talk about respect,
Yeah.
and some of these things are just fundamental core values that a person's mother should have taught them as a youngster. But perhaps not everybody has that. That is one of the places where martial arts can really help leaders, I've found, is in instilling a code of ethics and some fundamental values that are shared amongst the community. The physical conditioning is a big part of that for the mental resiliency as well as your physical resiliency. Your studio. Tell me a little bit about that. I didn't realize, I know you had a gym for about 8 years, wasn't it? Do you still have that gym?
2, yeah.
2 gyms?
I had 2, yeah. I had 2 CrossFit gyms, a Sheepdog CrossFit and Dog's Den CrossFit,
Okay.
both of which I'm no longer owner of, but I still coach at Sheepdog on the Sundays. It's in Port Coquitlam. My martial arts studio is called Ascension Martial Arts, and it's also in Port Coquitlam. And I was going somewhere with that, in line with what you were saying there. What was it now?
Mental resiliency?
Yeah, the resiliency piece. Thank you. The resiliency piece, highly underrated. Like, we know that adversity adds to the resiliency bank. Like, adversity in a controlled fashion either creates post-traumatic growth or it creates post-traumatic stress injury or occupational stress injury in the case of a professional setting. And so what we have is safety, so no real risk for harm aside from the odd very rare injury that can happen anywhere in soccer or baseball or whatever. But what you have is adversity. You spar, especially in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you get the sparring in, and when you start as a white belt, you're pretty much everybody's punching bag, and it is safe.
Right.
It is safe, but you are not winning, right? And so it's difficult, especially if you're somebody that's generally very successful, and you're generally very successful quickly at the things that you do, or you've been in the same field for many, many years, you're a subject matter expert, and now you get to test something that's completely out of comfort, and next thing you know, you're not winning as you're progressing, and then you start getting little wins here and there, and it's really humbling, and that's a critical piece. It's really humbling, but it also shows you that when you're having a really bad day on the mats, maybe 2 hours later you're back, and it's the greatest day, and it's weird because they're the same day.
Yes.
Right?
I think it was E.H. Chapin. He said, "Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars." And perhaps that can be a very accurate statement. And sometimes some people just don't get up from the scars, and they have a difficult time rebounding. Having those small wins, having that little light at the end of the tunnel. It's probably why people golf, actually, right? Same sort of thing. You get that one good shot, and then you suffer for the rest of the course, whacking the ball everywhere. But you need those little successive wins in order to build that mental resiliency. Now, you built, if I'm not mistaken, sort of standing on the shoulders of giants and using cumulative work that's out there, but you've built a mental resiliency program yourself, didn't you?
That is correct. Yeah, it's called Leadership Through Critical Circumstances. And it evolved greatly over the years. But essentially, what it was to begin with was a program to support our memberships and to support our police officers going through critical incidents, whether it was shootings or use of force, major use of force, or even some of the things that are a byproduct of life. So it could be, because the way I like to the analogy I make is imagine having a bucket and every single drop that you put in there, whether it's administrative stress or marital problems or problems with the kids or financial problems, and then you get to the office and there's a caustic work environment or a caustic culture. You have this, you have that, and it keeps on going until it's full. And now you have any sort of incident, especially in the critical incident realm, and boom, you're overflowing, right?
Right.
So our job was to essentially poke holes through that bucket in any means necessary. Poke the holes so that the water would flow out and the water level would stay low, so that we could send our people out to do the tough work that they have to do and then bring them back, because guess what? Next week, in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks, there's this other call and this other call. And we're talking about a team that's full-time that has hundreds and hundreds of operations a year. So our guys are not going anywhere, right? So so that's essentially how this started.
So I've heard, and you can correct me if you've heard otherwise, but I've heard that, let's say, the stress of getting married, the stress of like what would otherwise be viewed as a positive stress will have a very similar physiological response on the body. So whether somebody's looking at an individual who's constantly dealing with negative stresses or negative stresses, which everybody's going to have to one degree or another, combined with the positive stresses, all of that needs to be emptied from the bucket, so to speak.
Stress is stress. The body really doesn't make a big difference. And I can even add to that and say somebody that trains really, really hard on the physical realm adds to the stress as well.
Interesting.
And it is interesting because it's also an outlet.
Right.
Right. So which one of the greater goods, which one is it for you and how are you perceiving it? So for example, if we're going back, just to kind of unpack that a little bit, if we're talking about, say, and I'm not a psychologist, so bear with me here, but as part of my research, I've linked up with the Chicago Police Department psychological unit and some of the work they had done, and much smarter people than me along the way as part of the research project. So, but yeah, when we're looking at stress, even positive stress, or if it's even a thing, it's stress, and the reason why you're considering it positive is because there's a marriage in the end,
right?
And that's the outcome. So now we're outcome focused. So there's a little bit of outcome bias, but the stress that leads into the marriage isn't positive.
Right.
It's a positive event, but the stress is still the stress. It still takes a toll on you, right?
Interesting.
So it's a bit of semantics, I guess, but ultimately, the only reason why the stress is, it'd be the same as saying, you're gonna get into a fight, and it will go. All you need to know is that it will go your way, and when you finish, you win. So the stress of the encounter, is that positive because you're winning,
Right.
So it's a bit of a twisted thought process, right? Like
It kind of is, and the stress of a fight, I've always found, is typically the anticipation, or I should say, probably always the anticipation of the fight. The fight itself is never a stressful thing. It's you're in it, and you act and you react and you work in a way that you've either been trained or that something comes instinctually, but the anticipation of that event is a very stressful thing for a lot of people. And then the aftermath of that and how you mentally frame that event. Was that a positive event? Is it socially acceptable? Is it accepted by my supervisors, by my crew around me? Or am I now looked at as a black sheep? And I've seen from the limited research that I've done, when we talk about critical incident stress and you talk about PTSD and these different things, it's that mental mind frame that I've seen people be able to walk away from exact same incidents with very different outcomes.
Yeah, and I would say, in support of that, and what compounds their ability to do that is also what was their resilience bank at the time of the incident, and what kind of adversity have they gone through life before getting there. So, because that also will dictate how one person will react and how the other person will react. So those are compounding things.
Right.
You have mindset, mind frame, understanding their purpose, and all the other factors that play into how they're going to react to the event and how positive it is, but also what was the ability to sustain this level of stress to begin with, right? So the two kind of mesh together. So it's a very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, because when you bring up what has the individual been through ahead of time. Now, some people can go through something, they can get beaten down, they can get that little bit of a win, they can reframe that situation in their mind, and then they can start building their resiliencies. Other people will get beaten down, and they never can get that mindset right. And consequently, two people can have the same adversity coming up to a certain point and have two different mental resiliencies. How would you coach your team? How would you suggest to others to really enhance their mental resiliency?
Well, I'll speak to my guys, for example. Like, we used a lot of positive reframing, right? Because one of the issues that we know is humans are negatively biased, right? And we are. And the reason why we are is because evidently we're coming out of a cave and we're not looking left and right, and we're getting eaten, right? As in the old days, so to speak. And it's easy. And if you look, just to make a little segue, if you look at an MMA world champ, for example, like an absolute superstar, or even a boxer, or anybody that really excels in their field, their ability to shut down the voices is slim to none, right? So it's really hard to emulate, because what they get the same. You're an imposter. Eventually you'll be exposed, and people are going to know that you're not as good as they think you are, and all these other things.
Right.
But they really, really will quiet those voices down when other people just don't have that ability, and the voices will become louder and louder and louder and louder until it actually mutes their own. Right. So one of the things that I like to do that's actually quite easy, and I've spoken to this with a bunch of different podcasts, but it's basically have them listening to positive messaging, but those positive messages, they have to have an impact emotionally. They can't just be like, okay, you are going to process information with your cerebral, with your head. It's more about, can you feel this message, right? So in the context of my guys, for example, I used videos that were, say, set in a tactical context, right? Or in a military style context, or in a police, special operation type context. But the key messaging was done by motivational speaker, right? So they would essentially, at the beginning of each block, I would play, a 4, 5, 6 minute video. And my goal was not to change their life by playing this one video. My goal was for them to understand how it can positively impact their day and their shift, so that they get to do it on their own at home. So for me, when I'm cleaning the house, when I'm doing things, chores around the house or whatever, I'm not listening to music. I'm listening to motivational videos set in a context that's conducive to me having an emotional reaction. And I just blast them, right?
Very interesting.
And so what you do and what you find quickly is that I'm sleeping in bed at night and I will wake up reciting certain things. Luck is the last dying wish of those who believe that winning can happen by accident. And all these things, and your brain continues to process the information. And what I also tell them to do is to do it in the morning, because in the morning when you wake up, what happens? You listen to a song, you have it in your head all day. Well, now is the time to front load your frontal cortex and your emotional side and your subconscious mind with positive messaging. And it's crazy how effectively it works. Now, the problem is, because humans are inherently negatively biased, we tend to go back there. So what happens is, oftentimes people will do it for a while and they'll be like, oh, I felt really great. I felt like I was, able to do things that I normally would have been more apprehensive about, or I was able to public speak, or I was able to present, or do this, or lead a call, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
And then they're like, oh, well, that worked. It's over. No, it's not, because over time, what will happen is the voices will become louder and louder and louder. So what I do is, every time I have downtime, I just front load, jam pack my brain and my subconscious mind with these key messaging. And it never goes back there, if it makes any sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
No, you brought up a ton of things in that little short span. I wrote a couple things down so my ADHD mind doesn't run off in different directions.
Yeah.
One of the things when you're talking about that, the motivational, the positive imagery, the positive messaging, one of the biggest things I've heard people say is, "Oh, it's a short-term thing. It wears off." And you know what? So is washing. So is showering. Why not do that every day, right? I mean, it's a routine that you have to get into, and if you're not always doing it like what you say and keeping on top of it, then you will have diminishing returns.
And that's the disabler, right? And the disabler in all of us. I'm going to disable my own wellness. I'm going to disable my own ability to be better. I'm going to disable, it's, empower ourselves to do it. So yeah, understand that if you stop doing it, it will stop working. But what else do you have to do? Mm-hmm. You don't have to listen to Metallica. Well, you do, but you know, at some point you can switch it up and have a motivational video go out and really reinforces that key positive messaging. What's interesting with that too is, just like martial arts and just how difficult it is to get certain people to train, despite the data that shows that it's absolutely necessary for their own either professional endeavor or whatever the case may be, it is equally as hard to get somebody to listen to a 4-minute video after I've had this conversation with so many people because they just don't want to even see if it could possibly be right. That's how deep the disabler runs. Right?
Why do you think that is?
It is completely asimine.
Yeah.
We as humans have, I believe, more propensity to self-sabotage than any other species. Because we have the ability to process so much cognitive information. Like, how do we actually self-sabotage to the point of, if I said to you, give me 3 minutes of your time and I will prove to you that what I'm saying is real. Mm-hmm. What if I said to a police officer, come to the mats and I will teach you that your level of competence currently sits at the unknown incompetence, which means that you don't know what you don't know. And in 3.5 minutes, I'm going to show you that your life is in danger if you don't do something about the ability that you have to use of force in a controlled fashion. Mm-hmm. Right?
Oh, to jump on that.
Yeah, but that's not the case.
But most people don't.
That's not the case.
Right. Well, most people don't want to have their inadequacies pointed out.
100%. And so the one of the course that I have, the introspective leader course, is exactly about that. This is a transformational day for your leadership. We are going to look long and hard inside. There is nobody else responsible. There's nobody else to look at for rescue. It's all about going down and deep.
Very cool.
You know?
Very cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something, and I did a bit of research going into this as well, but you mentioned the word imposter. Mm-hmm. And in my research, I was listening to our local police chief here in Delta. You had a chat with him, and one of the things that you brought up was you actually were promoted to a leadership position and then promoted from there to an even higher leadership position. I think you had, what was it, like, not direct control, but about 500 people that were under. Is that a correct number?
No. So I essentially went from having 24 people reporting to me to overseeing, being broadly responsible for 8,200 employees in the division, right? Now, you're absolutely right. There's the span of control. We know what the span of control is, right?
Sure,
about 5 people.
Right.
So you have to have your leaders underneath, and that's how decentralized command works. But in terms of the image and in terms of my ability to reach and connect, I had to be able to do that with basically 8,200 people. Right. That was my job, to be an inspirational leader, so to speak. And I mean, this wasn't a task that was handed out to me.
No, you took that upon yourself.
This was an opportunity to do it right. I could have cruised through the position for 2 years, but
I think you mentioned in that interview that you felt like an imposter when you were first put into that. Can you speak about that? Because I don't think it's an uncommon thing for most people when they're trying something new.
100%.
To say, like, who am I? Mm-hmm. Who am I to be able to do this opposed to somebody else who might have greater accolades?
Sure. Well, to begin with, understanding that a tactical team leader such as me is held to the fire every single day. So we bring our accountability with us everywhere we go. Mm-hmm. We don't need other people to make us accountable for our actions. So for me, being in the unconscious incompetence is a very, very rare thing. I generally always know that I don't know anything about something. I just
Right.
don't know specifically what those things are.
Right.
But I will know who to speak to. So, as I like to tell my guys, know what you don't know and know who knows what you don't know. Or at the very least, who you could speak to find out what you don't know. So for me, when I moved on to an administrative position, so to speak, from being a tactical team leader, which was also an administrative position, let's call a spade. For the last 2 years of my career, I was in the command post and
Sure.
doing mostly enabling of my guys doing the work on the ground, which they did fantastic work. But when I moved to a truly administrative position at 30,000 foot, because I was now dealing with the assistant commissioner, the deputy commissioner, and the commanding officer of the division, which was very different from, and also dealing with Ottawa and the commissioner of the RCMP and having face-to-face meetings and doing presentations and these types of things. It was such a broad, and it was such a, it was so vastly different from what I was used to and comfortable with that the first time they put the ranks on my shoulders, I was like, you don't know anything. You don't own the job. You don't own this job yet. You're not ready for this rank, but now you have it, right? So there was a temporary, there was a period there where definitely I felt you have the ranks on your shoulders, but you don't know what you're doing. So for me, the sort of the defense mechanism and what that led me to want to do is you are going to earn this rank, and you're going to start right now. Because having a rank on your shoulder is a privilege. It's a privilege. You now have the ability to affect the collective positively and negatively. And if you're not prepared for the responsibility that comes along with that, and you're in for yourself, the collective is taking a back seat. Everybody's paying for that shortcoming. And so what it did for me is just it was extra motivation. The bridge was cut behind me, so to speak, right? I just had to go all out and try to make the best out of the experience that I had to cross it over to where I was going. And it took no time to figure out how that was going to work.
So some people will say fake it till you make it when you're in there, pretend like you have it. But you took a different approach and you said, okay, I've got the stripes on my shoulder now, and I'm going to really earn them. I'm really going to own it, make it my own. And for better or worse, as I look back, I can't say it was for a lack of trying.
No question.
That's a good way to do it.
Unquestionably controlling, what was within my sphere of influence. And really, I believe all I could ask myself was work as hard as I possibly could.
Right.
And I would never look back and say, you missed an opportunity to really give it your all, and you failed miserably. It might have been you failed miserably, but you tried everything you possibly could. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, as I think back, so my father was Vancouver Police. My grandfather, never met him. He was Vancouver Police as well. Actually, he's one of the ones that this company is named after. He was Silver Armino, VPD detective. And Cornelius Bader, my other grandfather, was an entrepreneur. I took the silver, I took the core, put them together.
Beautiful name.
But my father was VPD, and he was on their very first ERT, and then he was in charge of it for some time. And consequently, we would have most of the team over in the house, and I got to see the different people involved and over the period of time, see how the stresses of work can start affecting people. And one, he's passed away about a year ago, but got into the bottle pretty heavy. Another fellow resigned, took himself off the team, took himself out of policing altogether, moved up north a bit, and ended up taking his own life. Everybody kind of deals with things differently. And I'd look at how my father would deal with things and how anger would come out in certain ways when, in hindsight, looking back, what I would view as normal behavior was very, very different. I think in the very early days of the ERT, the mental conditioning aspect of it was confined to the warrior mindset, as opposed to the mental resiliency. When did that whole resiliency piece start to really take hold that you could see?
The real question is, when did we lose it? When you're looking at warrior culture, and not to compare, say, ERT with the samurais, but
Sure.
we'll use the samurais, for example, right?
Sure.
A lot of the pillars of resiliency were already within their mindset. They had a sense, a higher purpose. There was a social aspect to it. There was the physical aspect to it. There was a spiritual aspect to it, and the emotional side. And they were, they brought all those things together as well. Those are the pillars of resiliency, right?
Right.
And so what ended up happening, I think, over the course of whatever centuries, millenniums, whatever the case may be, we have lost the bigger picture, and it became a sort of a one-dimensional approach to problem solving, right? And when I think of my beginnings on the team, so now it would have been in 2007 or whatever. At the time, the old school, ERT guys were still they had a death grip on the team in terms of case. Some of them were still in position of leadership. Definitely, one of them was at the helm of the team at the time, and I remember vividly, going to a hostage rescue and actually, conducting it with 2 or 3 of the other guys. And when one of the supervisor asked, "Hey, should we give the guys some recognition for this or whatever?" He's like, "Wow, that's their job, right?" That was kind of the mentality. But I think reinforcing that purpose and, hey, guys, this was, a really tough call that we sent you to. You did a fantastic job, and here's some recognition. So now there's a positive attachment with this, and your sense of purpose is increased and all these other things. So they all feed into each other, right? And there was always on the ERT side, just like there is on the military side, a strong importance given to sort of being tough, right? And being tough is much more to skin deep. Being tough is sometimes having the ability to say, this is too much for me, or how do I get better at this, or what can I do better here, and show some vulnerability. Mixing up my 2 languages, 2 of which I don't speak officially, but and so my thing has always been focus on what you can do to be better all around, and you'll never have to project an image of toughness. You will just be tough. And generally, people don't try to overcompensate as they have something,
right?
Which ties right into why police officers should be good at controlling suspects on the ground, or even being able to sustain an assault standing up and be able to react appropriately, do all those things, and have a certain level of stress resistance to some of those events, so that they never feel the need to overcompensate for the things that they're insecure in.
Right.
If that makes any sense. So.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So for me, sorry, I went on a bit of a segue here, but for me, it's a very different game now. I think over the course of the last, I would say I'd say 5 to 10 years, and as more of this newer generation has started coming through, and there's a recognition organizationally, not just from the RCMP, but from a variety of different organizations, are all important. The importance of mental wellness and emotional wellness, and it's bleeding into everything, and it should. And so I think that now we're doing a much, much better job. It's not perfect. But we're doing, especially, and I'm speaking about the team here,
right?
Not necessarily, painting with a broad brush here,
right?
But just the team. And I mean, I think there's no going backwards now ever, because we've had plenty of our guys go do some incredible things that you would have thought years ago would have definitely benched a bunch of guys for a long, long time. And the prospect of speaking, I'm thinking about the gentleman you mentioned that took his own life. Like the prospect of speaking about those things back in the day would have been, a sacrilege, right? Like,
it was.
What are you doing? Just drink another drink, like.
Right. Well, 100%. Like I say, one of them. You know what? I won't say the name. I won't say the nickname. But very heavy into the drink. But this fellow, he said, I remember he was at the kitchen table talking about how he would start shivering and convulsing violently as he started to drive over the bridge, and he'd break down into tears, and he didn't know why. And this is as he's driving over the bridge to go into work. And the incident that he was involved with wasn't even one that I think people would look at and say, well, are you kidding me? Is that it? But the fact that the balance of life and death was held within his hands, and the fact that he didn't react in a way that he thought he would react or that he figured he should have reacted really didn't sit well with him. And on top of that, I didn't get the sense that there's a heck of a lot of support from management in the whole process. And I remember him telling the story, and I remember him going through it and looking at it, and I was very young at the time, and thinking, well, that's not what a tough person does, right? Because that was how I was raised, and that's how everybody kind of thought. Maybe he doesn't belong on the team, when in fact the guy was a perfect fit for the team had he had these mental resiliencies in place and had a support network for being able to reframe that incident in a way that was positive.
Yeah, as I completed a research project when I first moved to the commanding officer's office, I asked for permission to go around and interview people that were involved in critical use of force and have the conversations about what was done with them following the incident. I mean, during and post incident, just to see where the balls were dropped so that we could obviously pick up some slack and tighten up some things. And I was absolutely amazed. The vast majority of our members weren't actually adversely afflicted by whatever incident they actually responded to. It was the way they were treated after. So when people come into policing and come into these first responder job, they have an expectation of some of the things they're going to see. Therefore, there's a preloading of the information, and the punch you expect is better than the punch you don't expect.
Right.
So then they would go to work on the daily with an acceptance and that this may be the case today. I prepare for this. I have this training and that training, and so. But what they didn't prepare for is to get abandoned along the way, and unfortunately. It's not always an organizational thing where everybody dropped the ball, but sometimes it's just that one person, right? It's that one person that didn't quite get it right and was going through a clinical process at the time at which the person that was actually a part of the incident is hypersensitive following an incident, and they should be, because it's abnormal. Like we're sending our people to abnormal situations, right. and then something was said or something was done or an attitude was taken and the person felt completely betrayal, like a strong sense of betrayal or being betrayed by the organization. And then, it's interesting too because, and I tell this to members all the time, it's like the force treated me like crap. Well, we've had this conversation for, say, 2 hours and you've mentioned this person 900 times, right? Is this person representing the force? To a certain extent they do, but they are not the force. They are not the organization. They're right. One person. That was your disabler, and he really caused some severe damage, right? So the idea, it's tough, right? Because if you have a line of, say, 10 people that have the ability to impact somebody's career or their lives, really, and the lives of their family, all it takes is one. It just takes one. So they have to be in unison. They have to be in sync. They have to be squared away with the processes. They have to be prioritizing wellness over anything else and recovery over anything else. And they all have to be on the same page. And if they don't, somebody will pay. A
lot of the retired police officers that, not all, but I see a lot of them that I've dealt with, will have a resentment or an anti-establishment attitude after getting out of policing as they look back because of those one or two people that, it's a very good analogy that you put forward. Yeah. The issue that you also brought up was having the confidence of being able to deal with people in the street in a way where you now no longer have to overuse force or overexert your role. And I quite often hear the same thing come up. Well, how come we're hiring these people who've never been in a fight before? How come we're prioritizing university education over top of perhaps some street smarts? And I see the argument on both sides. I see the fact that some compassion and a different approach can quite often have a much better outcome than perhaps going in with a heavy hand. And I also see the side when the heavy hand needs to be applied. But that process of hiring, and I know you've heard it before, and then people will get into positions of leadership, and leadership will start to promote other people with similar experiences, life values, interests that they have, and you start getting a top-heavy establishment with certain ethos and outlooks, and if you get that one or two negative individuals in there, it can start to sour an organization rather quickly. And I think that's where some of this media reporting has been, at one point, the RCMP, I mean, you couldn't paint a black mark on them. And for a long time now, all you hear about in the news is just really, really negative things. And when we first started talking here, you brought up a recent one, and you did a post on Instagram as well. Did you want to talk about, I think I brought up a couple things here, but why don't you just step off on whichever one you would like to?
Okay, if I get lost, you'll have to bring me back on track here.
Sure.
But I'll start with one thing. To begin with, we know that group problem solving and effective problem solving is better when you have diversity of thoughts, right? So if you surround yourself with like-minded individuals, it looks like we're doing the right thing. But it's not always the case. Now, don't get me wrong. Evidently, you could say, well, if you're on an ERT team, the majority of the guys are like-minded individuals. They're hard-driven go-getters that want to go out and do things, and they want to step up. But amongst those personalities, there's a wide spectrum of different variety, right? And so you can have some similarities, but having diversity of thoughts especially is critical for effective group problem solving. And there was I believe a Stanford University or one of the university in the States, I can never remember which one, had done basically an exercise where they had a strong baseline with a collective IQ much higher than another group that had diversity of thoughts, by way of backgrounds and ethnicities and all these other things.
Right.
And what they end up doing is they end up being able to come up to the conclusion that the group that had a lower combined IQ was still better at effectively problem solve the dilemmas that they were given. Because there was, I've dealt with this in my job, and I've got this as an experience, and versus we're all thinking the same. Because if you're group problem solving with people that are all like you, you're essentially alone.
You're in an echo chamber.
Yeah, you are, and so that's a very interesting dichotomy, so to speak. But to go on with the media and hopefully you haven't started something that we can't put back in the box here. But call me naive, call me idealist. I don't know, but I do believe that there is an ethical, a professional, and ethical, professional, and just outright responsibility to stop the divide. Right? We're not what we are seeing currently with the polarization has the potential to be extremely self-harming for this species, and the prospect of us getting so bad to a point where we self-destruct isn't that far off, and call me fatalistic or anything, but it is what it is. If we keep going down those rabbit holes where we're getting further and further and further apart, and nobody is unable to bring people back together so that we can pull in the same direction, we're going to have some serious problems as a species. And we are not even talking about, imagine electricity going off. We saw it with COVID. Mm-hmm. It didn't take 24 hours to find out that we couldn't work together. Everybody just went running in their, every direction.
Got to get toilet paper.
Yeah, and when I say everyone, obviously There's always the people that are there to assist others, and we love them, and we're lucky to have them. But it had an incredible impact, and we're talking about a virus with a survival rate that far exceeded anything. Not to downplay it, but that far exceeded anything that we would experience if we had, VX gas attack or whatever the case may
Right.
be, you know, like something truly, truly dramatic. And so, you know, I realize, and just being devil's advocate and kind of going through my own processes, I realize that the news media, as we know it, especially the paper format, is dying. It's a dying business, and it's really, really hard for them to even stay afloat, right? So I realize that there is a need for them to inject some sensationalism in there so that they can hit certain numbers that allows them to continue proliferating news, right? However, at some point you kind of have to look at, what are we after here? Are we prioritizing financial gain, or are we prioritizing humankind's, right? And our ability to positively influence all of these people and change millions of lives. So when you're at the end of the day, what you are doing, you may be successful, but are you meaningful? You know, is that something that actually truly makes a difference, and something that you can look at yourself in the mirror and be extremely proud to have been a part of? So for me, again, going back on track, what I want to see is fair reporting. I'm not asking for them to, sugarcoat the actions of police officers. If there is misconduct, absolutely not. Let's expose them. Let's deal with them. Let's do all this good stuff. But inversely, when things are done, and members are rushing into a building to save a 2-year-old,
right? Like recently,
like in this case,
yes,
and they were stabbed in the process of doing so, don't go out and call and make a big headlines on your newspaper that states police officers were cut, right? Because it's semantics. I get it. But if I speak to somebody that has zero frame of reference, and I go, okay, 2 police officers were cut, and I said to them, I need you to describe to me what you just envisioned.
Right.
They would
look at their finger.
100%. They
Right.
would think, when I cut myself with onions. So because that's what we do as humans. Our cognitive experiences are now attached to whatever we know as a reality.
Right.
What police work is, a lot of the times, is extremely gruesome. Extremely, extremely gruesome. So if cops are stabbed, that is a serious life-altering, potentially life-ending situation. And the person that's done it also deserves to be exposed. And I'm not saying necessarily with their name or anything like that, but I'm just saying, don't downplay it or diminish the actions by saying that police officers were cut. Because now it makes the suspect sound like potentially he did something right, or he didn't do anything that
Didn't
bad.
trim his nails well enough earlier, and
That's
kind of
right.
cut the.
That's right. And now the police officers that entered this place knowing, I don't know the details,
Sure.
for a fact, but like we'll assume that there are weapons in most of the houses that we go to, especially if they're problematic. And I can tell you that that's the case. There's no question. And if we were to think about kitchen knives, who doesn't have that? So,
Everyone.
Yeah. So there's always tactical considerations when going on calls like this. And if the person is emotionally disturbed to the point where you're dealing now with a set of circumstances where you have a 2-year-old that's in danger to the point where you launch essentially a hostage rescue, right? Because there is exigency to do so. You know that some of those things are going to be coming your way. Like, that's an accepted fact. Like, you will get either hurt or you're going to have to respond to something you will be faced with. So for them to have that information front-loaded in their frontal cortex and be ready to go and do it anyways, go get stabbed, and the 2-year-old is being rescued, needs to be proliferated. It needs to be proliferated. The public needs to hear the story and needs to see it. As much as they are entitled to know when cops are conducting themselves embarrassingly.
Sure.
Right?
I think that's a really tall order, particularly considering the negative bias that we already talked about to begin with, that people look towards. You can look towards a really positive event, and some people clap, hey, that's great, glad to hear it. But the negative ones, and people just dwell over it. And on top of that, the media, holy crow. So if we talk about print media, these people said, well, they're just doing it to sell newspapers. And friend of mine in the media says, no, it's so we can sell advertising, right?
Yeah.
Really, the better the circulation,
Sure.
the more advertising, the more we have, and we've only got a limited amount of space, and we got to catch your attention. And so we'll put it forth like this, and you're going to have people with negative biases against law enforcement because they got a speeding ticket when they didn't think they should have, and this is their way to get back, and they've got a pen or whatever it might be. And I know law enforcement has, for a long time now, been taking the media out to on ride-alongs, take them out to the range, show them like these are the decisions that you have to make. Here's some simulated training that they go through to give a better perspective in how things are reported. I don't know if that change in how the media provides the information is ever going to get any better, particularly considering that most people get their information through online sources now. And the online sources are heavily integrated with advertising and revenue streams through Google, which owns YouTube, and Facebook, which owns Instagram. And you'll notice, like you brought up COVID, you can't write something on social media without the advertising company coming in and putting their 2 bits on the if you write in, hey, I got my COVID shot, you're going to see a thing that comes up underneath that talks about COVID. I don't know if fairness in reporting is something that we will ever really see again. And when you talk about this precipice of the divisiveness within people right now and how the media and most of our information sources are really playing up to that, I see it. I think most people see it. And it might be exacerbated by what we actually read in the media. It might be greater in our minds of what it might actually be. But at some point, it'll reach a tipping point and it'll self-level, for better or for worse. But when you talk about leadership in policing, which ties back to who are we hiring and why, how do we develop mental resiliencies, how do we develop basic people skills and a value system so that people can deal with at-risk individuals or people on the street in a way that's going to be conducive to publicly positive reporting. You have been developing a system to sort of change the face of leadership in policing, which I think will touch on all of these points that you've brought up. It'll touch on how the media reports on it, because the leadership will now take, hopefully, a more proactive approach in how they're engaging the citizens. Like, I've always thought, holy crow, a boots on the ground, hearts and minds approach, like what the military will do when they go into a foreign area by the police, would do wonders to getting just the basic idea across. You talk about a person getting cut. Well, holy crow, I've known people who've been stabbed. I've known people who've been killed through by knives. You don't have to go that deep. It doesn't have to be that big of a stab, and you can do horrific damage. I remember I used to bounce back in the day.
So did I.
Ozone nightclub out in Surrey there, back when that was around. And I was hired there. The guy didn't. I was working at a gym at the time, and one of the owners came by the gym and says, "You'd be perfect. You should come bounce at the Ozone." I wasn't even old enough to attend the Ozone, but no problem. I'll go there. I won't tell him my age, right? They had a mass exodus of people leaving. Someone got shot in the face in the parking lot. A body was found in the dumpster behind the strip club that was right next door to it. But we'd encounter knives there. A friend of mine, I gave some body armor to because I had a whole bunch of old VPD stuff, and he ended up getting poked in the belly and in the back, and just went through just a little bit. And then he caught it in the arm and went through his bicep when he put his hand up to kind of block his throat. But a bit of a digression there. When we talk about how these things are reported, if people could understand the actual seriousness of what an edged weapon can be to an individual. They say, well, you got a gun, he's got a knife. Come on. I mean, why don't you just wrestle the knife out of his hand? What? He was X distance away. How far away is that? And of course, most police know about the Tueler drill and the Magliato and all the other theories on distance and how long a person can live and how far away they can be lethal to. But all of these little points, I think, could be addressed through what you're talking about in the leadership and policing, how leadership interacts with media, how leadership interacts with the subordinates so that they interact with the general public. Is that sort of the plan that because as you're talking here and I'm thinking about, it sounds like a very holistic approach that you're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And the good news is, just to go back on something you said, because I think it would be a disservice for me to not sort of speak to it, but, or at least to give you some semblance of an opinion on it. I realize that striving for fairness is going to always be difficult. Now, the problem is accountability, right? And so the problem is this. We have a prime minister right now that will not answer a question for 27 minutes while all of us are asking it again. And after 3 or 4 times that he's skillfully skirted his way out of answering the question, nobody asks it again. And I'm standing there going, somebody asked that question again.
Hold them accountable.
Yeah, and so this is what the issue is here. The public has a lot of power. If the public was to turn around and say, tell us what truly happens here. Tell us who's truly dying from COVID. Tell us who, we would get the information unvetted, right? But there's a lot of information floating around that just we're not getting, and we're not asking for it, so we're not getting it. So it's the same with this. Take one isolated incident, because we can go on tangents for days with how we're going to make that happen. How is it actually logistically feasible, and how do we all work together and whatever, right? But if you look at, say, the incident with a 2-year-old was, so there is enough information out there to know that occurred, right? And so now what needs to happen is there needs to be a public backlash on the way it was addressed in the first place. Let's call it 500 emails. Let's call it 5,000 emails. Let's call it 50,000 emails. At some point, it will have an impact. It will have an impact because the next person that comes along a similar situation will be, last time we reported on this and we weren't accurate and we're going to get 50,000 emails following, right? There is no repercussions. It's acting without repercussions just leads us to do anything. I'll give you an example of this, and I'll sort of lead right into your bouncing example, because I was a bouncer in Montreal during the biker war between the Work Machine and the Hells Angels. It was war zone, no question. But it's interesting because as this war was unfolding, and as it was getting worse and worse, and people were dying everywhere and caught in the crossfires, and people were trying to kill people in club lineups with rocket launchers and all kinds of stupidness. One of the things that never happened for the longest time was for people to say enough is enough, right? So those things proliferated and they continued, and it was getting worse and worse, and eventually
an innocent got killed.
An 8-year-old got killed, right? And his Jeep blew up in essentially a vehicle-borne IED, and boom, and he received some piece of parts of the Jeep, and his life ended. When that happened, everybody in Quebec got together and they're like, enough's enough. They put their foot down. It took 1.5 years to 2 years following that to make hanging out with people with colors illegal. I'm talking about, obviously biker gang colors, right? And having any gathering of more than so and so. The sentences got way stiffer, and the pursuit and the budgets increased for the units that were actually chasing those guys. And eventually, what happened is there was nothing to be found in Quebec in terms of bikers. It was Mambouche was in jail. His son was in jail. The Nomads were completely disbanded. It was everywhere. And so all it took is for everybody to get together once, right? And anyways,
but we're seeing that now.
We do,
and they call it SLO, social license to operate.
Sure.
And we're seeing it, but not necessarily in a positive way.
No, exactly. And this, obviously, a good tool can always be used for a bad purpose, right? You can have the most beautiful, lapua, and you can either kill an elephant or people. Yes. But anyways, so yeah, I do believe that, and I don't want to make it sound like I single-handedly, hold the key to fixing all the policing problems, because
Right.
it would be extremely disingenuous on my part to say that. But certainly, what the plan is to get people to take responsibility for the things that are not going well for us as police officers and as departments and all these other things. And so teaching all levels of leadership to stop looking around for somebody to rescue them and to self-rescue by being extremely critical of their own actions, and also by seeking input and work cooperatively with their people. So I support you, you support me, not in a way that some media puts a spin on it where I hide you, you hide me. We're talking about ethical, professional behaviors here.
Right.
And how are we going to problem solve certain things in a prioritize and execute type fashion? We're having an issue with media relationship. Who's fixing that and how? And how can we enable it? And how can we help? We need to get the people that are resistant to change to step off. And what's interesting with resistant to change is maladjusted leaders, as I call them, will often be in charge of change. That is really interesting. And one of the things that I found out is at times I think they take that responsibility on to prevent it, and
I'd agree 100%.
and it may be conscious or it may be subconscious, but it ends up happening anyway. And my conversations are, you are supposed to be spearheading a movement of change here and introduce us to the century that we're in, and be proactive. But you are not. You're actually disabling everything. So I need you to curb the disabler and start looking, so that's kind of what the idea is. You're absolutely correct, and it impacts absolutely every aspect of your ability to police effectively.
So responsibility and taking responsibility for actions is not something that the RCMP has a stellar reputation for. Now, they might do it, but in the public perception, the public eye, they definitely are held in the same sort of vein as your example of Trudeau there. And I remember I was doing a firearms instructor's course with the Vancouver Police a number of years ago. And there was a VPD officer during that time who, I believe he shoved somebody on the streets. It was a woman. I think she might have been disabled, or there was some issue there. And within the period of time from that incident happening, the officer made a mistake. He thought he was being approached by somebody with ill intent. Turned out this person was MHA. And I think it was about a 3-day span between that incident happening and the brass coming out and saying, yeah, that officer screwed up. We are now putting that officer on some retraining, pulled them from the current division until they're trained up, and we'll report back after. And that just seemed to me, and I looked at the rest, everyone else there was law enforcement, and I looked at how everyone else dealt with it, and like, yeah, makes sense. Sounds good. And that approach to me, you get in front of the problem, you take responsibility for it, even if it's a situation where the officer, maybe they made the right decision based on everything, but didn't have that one key piece of information. For the department to stand up and take responsibility, that sends a really strong message. And conversely, watching multiple issues, one of which is information up right over my right shoulder, where the RCMP would rather double down, circle the wagons, so to speak, and not want to admit wrongdoing. And I always wonder why that is. Is there the worry of opening Pandora's box? If I say, yeah, we screwed up here, then everything's going to come flying? Or is it just arrogant protectionism? I don't know. And am I off base in that sort of, because keep in mind, I was raised in a municipal police force family, which had a very different perspective of what federal policing looks like.
Mm-hmm. It's also much easier to turn a small speedboat around than a aircraft carrier, right? And so, but you're not wrong in the sense that what I could say, I guess, and what I could speak to, and not that I'm being limited in anything I say whatsoever, but I got to speak to what I know. I can't just start making stuff up. What I have seen and what I do know is that the RCMP's sort of media strategy, and this is not a knock on those that are working in the media strategies, but the broad strategy is vastly underfunded for one, and also it's like there's a certain centralization of command there that needs to stop. It needs to be decentralized. It needs to be sent to the region, and we need to have some strong teams of strong leaders. We're talking about people, that can take ownership of things, that can dig into things and find facts that can be given without, say, jeopardizing an investigation or making a statement that's completely off base. Now, from the perspective of the members, there's no protective attitude on the part of the organization as far as our regular members are concerned, because these guys feel like they're being ragged into the mud incessantly, and nobody is stepping up for them. So this is a two-way street. They're actually not providing information, but they're also not defending the members, right? So now you have basically it's on two fronts, where it's a failing on two fronts. Like communicate, and one of the things that I really, really don't like is when you start taking listeners and people in the public for idiots. Like don't start taking people for idiots. Like if you actually give them the totality of the circumstances, or at the very least an exemplification of what this might look like, or this might have occurred here, or we don't know for sure all the details, but we can tell you this. We've asked our officers to go in a very tough situation. This occurred. As soon as we know more, we'll give you more. But we don't even give them that because we're afraid of making a mistake. If you make a mistake, you own your mistake. You own your mistake publicly and you apologize for it. And those are the mechanisms that we're going to put in place so that it does not repeat itself. And this is it. It's over. You don't lose respect when you do that as a leader. But when you start hiding, being disingenuous, this is where you're now establishing your character as an organization. And the problem with that is after that, everything you do is always tinted with the possibility that you are being disingenuous, right?
Right.
And so for me, I would love to see a much more open format with respect to how we communicate preemptively, whether it's with operations or some of the work that we do or some of the really difficult situation that our members are in. And, take the public for what they are, which is if you give them reasonable facts and you give them they will come to a very similar conclusion. And yes, there's always going to be the outliers, that the conspiracy theorists and all these other things. I mean, conspiracy. We can't get together on what kind of color pen we're going to purchase, so let alone broad scope conspiracy. This is just unworkable in a government organization as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, the lack of media strategy needs to be addressed, and it's not a follow-up to whatever happens. It's preemptive.
It's got to be proactive.
It's proactive, and it's after as well. Give you another example of this, that has had tragic consequences. So Pierre Lemaitre was the gentleman, that came out, and during the Dzerzhinsky incident at the Vancouver airport,
right?
And he has made, first statement that had some mistakes in it, and it wasn't ill will or anything like that. It just was reported in a way that, conveyed some facts that weren't necessarily facts. At the time, there were some missing pieces there. So what happened was, of course, Pierre wants to go back and wants to correct his mistake and wants to go to the public and say, look, I screwed up. I didn't have all the facts here, and I thought I heard this or I was told this, but it wasn't verified, or whatever the case may be, and explain that to the public and let them know what happened. And he was told categorically, no, you are not going to do that. Took his life.
Right.
He took his own life.
Right.
Right. And we need to understand, and it's quite interesting, because when you set a culture of ownership with yourself as a leader, ownership and accountability with yourself as a leader, it starts bleeding into your culture and all of your people. And it's really difficult nowadays to go anywhere and have somebody say, this didn't work out because I did this wrong, or I didn't work
When do you
hard,
see that?
or hardly ever.
Right.
But on units, like say on the team I was on or whatever, we sat there and that was a constant. People were fighting over who was responsible for what, as in trying to take the blame.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't even working that day. You had nothing to do with it, like it got to an extent. It got to an extent where everybody, the culture of ownership was there. Well, if you transpose this on a broad spectrum, you are doing it organizationally. You are now sending this down the ranks as well. So there is it's a Pandora's box. You're absolutely right, in that if we do it correctly, it's going to have a trickle down effect that will impact everybody's ability to have that ownership. And when I say everybody, we always know there's some that won't. But the more you have the masses do the right thing, the less popular it is to have somebody not do the right thing, if that makes any sense.
That's a really interesting way to look at it too, because with the social license to operate, it seems like there's a misguided approach to ownership of responsibility in society at the moment. And maybe that's because they have not received a good example from those who should be in a leadership position. When people are going and looking at events that happened 100 or more years ago and saying, we've got to take ownership for this now. Well, and that's going to open up a whole other can of worms of things, but the level of ownership that officials are being asked to take upon themselves, sometimes for things that had absolutely nothing to do with them, I think is rather unreasonable by sometimes the vocal majority. Mm-hmm. Having a police force, having a government in power that will take responsibility and encourage the federal police force to do the same thing and set the parameters or the framework for what is right and what is wrong and what is acceptable or not will probably have a very massive effect in the populace who is looking at it and saying, hey, it's not right. I don't know what is right, but my personal feeling is, and running off on all of these strange tangents.
I couldn't agree more. I will try to qualify this as much as I can and try to avoid, a nuclear explosion. But here's what my thoughts are on that. You're talking about events that occurred, hundreds of years ago. You're talking about events that were, say, at the time, church-led, mm-hmm. supported by the current government, mm-hmm. enforced by the RCMP, mm-hmm. supported by the public that puts people into power. Right? So everybody along the way had a play in the horrible things that occurred.
Sure.
There isn't one group in that, including the public, that can turn around and look at anybody else and say you are responsible for that, because the person of today is as responsible for those events as you are.
Right.
Because you elected, if we're going to go down that rabbit hole, you elected the people in power at the time. So therefore, you today are responsible for what happened.
Mm-hmm. But people don't want to look at it like that because it's a process of shifting responsibility. It's,
again,
that fault, not my fault.
Again, it's deflection. Right? And deflection is just everywhere, but it leads us nowhere. It leads us to further divide. We need to understand, we need to 100% try to find collective ways to we'll never change what happened. Mm-hmm. It is absolutely horrible. Mm-hmm. I don't even want to go down that. I mean, right. I think we all understand how absolutely horrible those situations were. Mm-hmm. And what are we doing today to ensure that this is never, ever, ever, ever repeated, that there is no bleeding, mm-hmm. of the same culture continuing to proliferate, all these other things. And I will take ownership of this all day. But we need to understand it was a very, very different time. All the people involved, for the 99% of them are dead. There's mm-hmm. no question there. Especially those in positions of power, because they would have been already in their 30s or 40s. And so now it's how do we move forward? And what do we do now to make things?
One other tangent here, and you brought it up, and I just figured, it's just been sitting in the back of my...
Go ahead.
Here we go.
I'm just warming up.
Yes. COVID. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not a contentious topic. Probably a little less contentious of what we're talking about at the moment. So friend of mine, longtime friend, went to high school with him, gives me a phone call. Says, Trav, I've been tasked with taking a look at how we can increase vaccination rates in the northern areas of the province among hunters. And he works for the provincial government, and he's a director, and he's got a lot of people working under him, and they're looking, why aren't we having an adoption rate like we'd like to see out there of the vaccination? I said, well, I can give you my perspective, and it may or may not be shared by these other people, but I think the biggest part of all of this puzzle is how that information is communicated. And just what you were saying earlier about not taking people's intelligence for granted. You know, there was an article I read, I believe it was Jeff Bezos and whoever I think it was Tim Cook, the two of them talking about creating cultures of success. And they said unequivocally, time and time again, they find that when they have a group of individuals who are highly driven and they bring somebody from the outside in to join that group, that person might not be the most highly driven person, but they will match that drive that the rest of the group has. Likewise, if they have a group of people who are rather lazy and they bring a highly driven person in, it doesn't take long for that person to kind of meet that norm. People will sort of level to their environment. They kind of want to fit in. So when we talk about not underestimating an individual's intelligence or the masses' intelligence, why don't we just anticipate that people have some intelligence and they can make a decision if we present them with that information? So I took them through point by point some of where my concerns were. I mean, nobody wants to feel forced into doing something. Nobody wants to be coerced. If you give them the information and it makes sense, they'll probably readily jump at it. And went through a plan that I figured the whole thing essentially just revolved around honesty in how information is being provided. And we'll see. He took notes. He said, well, I doubt, I have my doubts in how all of that will go across, but just a bit of an interesting aside talking about responsibility in media, responsibility in leadership, because he's in a leadership role. Why provide information that's partially true or true in one respect but doesn't take into other things? Provide it all there for people to look at. Like if the end goal of vaccination revolves around the fact that our country is publicly funded in our healthcare and we lack ICU beds to deal with a pandemic on top of everything else, then say that. Maybe people will step up and say, well, you know, whether I believe in COVID or not, whether I believe we'll get this or not, I do know that people get in car accidents, people get hurt, and maybe if this will lessen my effects of if I do get COVID and it'll lessen the strain on ICU, then put that out there for people. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you're referring to earlier, and I thought that was worth mentioning, is called synergical, basically, what's the word? You know what the concept of synergy is essentially you bring two people together. If you have one person dig a trench, how long does it take in that person? And if you bring another person in and they work well together, how much does it take in two people? Well, logic would say half the time. But the reality is it could be as much as 3 times as fast.
Right.
Inversely, you can take that one person that takes a year to dig a hole, you bring another person, the wrong person, and now you're dealing with triple the time.
Right.
That it would have taken one person to do it because you've negatively impacted the masses. But what you're speaking of is you already have an established synergy one way or another. Now you're bringing one person that gets, sucked in essentially with the culture that's already established.
Right.
It's very, very powerful and it works. And that's why you want to have that positive synergy in your workplace so that your people are actually force multiplier.
Right.
And they can do a lot more with a lot less and a lot more effectively. Yeah. And where was I going with this again now?
Well, I guess the reason I kind of segued into that, because it was brought up about COVID, and it's interesting about how media is putting it out and how the government's choosing to communicate. I brought all that up, but the one overriding thing that I saw out of this whole COVID experience that was concerning more than the lack of toilet paper, right? More than all of these goofy little things that are going on was the general group groupthink. Like that was scary. And that is scary. And when you take a look at how groupthink is affecting how we operate on a day-to-day basis, and I think that bleeds back over into organizations like the RCMP and what that groupthink looks like, and how people can break out of just the echo chamber, so to speak, and it is something where they can replicate that Stanford, I think it was you're saying, the experiment where you have more diversity in thought to be able to come to a solution. But that the general groupthink that I'm seeing right now is something if we're talking about it in, let's say, a policing context, is definitely something that can use some work. There's a lot of positive in the groupthink, but there are areas within the leadership and in management that would need to be positively affected in order for ownership to be taken on different tasks. And I got to wonder, how do you do that?
Yeah, so it's a big undertaking, right? So for me, excuse me, not sure what's in there, cat maybe or something. For me, one of the areas of focus has been changing the culture from the inside out. Right? Because here's what the issue is. Even when we're having a conversation about management and leaders, all these people along the way, all the way to however high of a rank you want it to be, are thinking of their leaders, right? So now what we have done is we've essentially taken 80% of the workforce and took him out of the problem-solving equation. We didn't do it, but they did it. Because that's what happens, right? And so for me, when I hear, management this and management that, the question is always, what are you doing? What have you done today to make things better for the organization? What have you done today to make things better for your peers? What have you done today for whatever, X, Y, and Z? Okay? And if the answer is nothing, zip it and get something done. I don't want to, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear deflection. I don't want to hear who can do this for you or not. Take some actions, make some calls, and help someone do something. And so I just think that, again, the more unpopular we make it to be a certain way, the easier it will be to affect the change. So we need to have the masses pulling in the same direction, and that's going to be putting some pressure, right? And also as people are starting to leave the ranks because they're retiring or they're leaving the outfit or whatever the case may be, you're going to now replace with a generation that's been going through those changes and now are a part of a certain culture which changes the culture of the leadership. Right? So you, and I say that to the people all the time, is you are the next wave of leaders. Hence why it's so important for us to, and I mean, let's call a spade a spade. A police officer that is sworn in and receives a badge is expected to be a leader.
Absolutely.
Constable or not, they will be on critical incident scenes. They will be dealing with accidents. They will be dealing with problem solving. They will take the lead on all of those things. So to say, well, I'm not interested in leadership, well, that's for somebody that isn't in policing. Period.
Oh, absolutely.
Once you become a police officer, you've abdicated the right to not be a leader. And that's not to say that you can't also follow, because that's a critical quality of a leader, having the ability to follow.
Yeah, you need to be a good follower to be a good leader. And
Exactly.
I think most leaders who are in that position will have received that training. I remember at 12 years old, one of the things I had to memorize, leadership's the art of influencing human behavior in a manner. Oh, did I forget it? Influencing human behavior to accomplish a mission in a manner so desired by the leader.
A common goal. I love it.
Right.
Best description of leadership. And if you look at do you know the description of management?
It's a science, not an art.
And what is it normally assigned to? Assets.
Right.
Things.
Right.
Right. So I often hear that. And, I'm very impressed with you remembering that by heart, by the way. But yeah, and so now you have your manager versus leader kind of conversation, and of course you have the people that we know that managerial tasks are a part of leadership, but the other way around isn't always the case. So ultimately, what we should be striving for is having those inspirational leaders, the ones that people want to be like.
Yes.
Not liked by, but be like, emulate, and once you start start having those types of leaders in organizations, like leaders are pumped out, quickly. It's so interesting because people will go out and do the things that leader has done to be where they are, or to have the perspective that they have, or all these other. And we see it now with all kinds of podcasts that are out there. As you have the Jocko Willings and the it's very interesting how. If Jocko says something, all of a sudden you have all these leaders everywhere going, okay, I should probably be doing this. I dropped the ball on this, and now it's crazy. We're in an age of information where there is zero excuse not to be up to par with the information out there.
Mm-hmm. It's fantastic.
There's so much information.
So as you're talking, I made 3 separate notes.
Yeah.
Because I think it would be of value to people who are listening.
Mm-hmm.
At the beginning, you're talking about front loading on your day, listening to positive affirmations, listening to positive people talking about things. What is on your playlist for that? Who do you tend to listen to?
Well, it depends what kind of pursuit I'm after, right? If I'm listening to a straight up leadership podcast, generally is going to be Jocko.
Okay.
And the reason why I really like Jocko, not just for Jocko, because I relate to him. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, so am I. We have all these other things, but what I do like is a David Burke and all these other people that he has on there that are absolutely incredible humans and have wealth of knowledge, and the Vietnam vets and the SOG guys and all these other things, right? And I really, and there will be reading off the Marine Corps leadership groups, which of course 350 years of combined leadership experience in the Marine Corps. I mean, just
right,
incredible leaders coming out of the Marine Corps, as we know. But this will be for that pursuit. Now, if I'm in a mood for, say, intellectual pursuit, I'll be listening to the Jordan Peterson or the Lex Freeman, or I will be listening to who else am I listening to on the daily? What's his name? Weinstein or Bert Weinstein?
Okay, yeah.
And then there's Sam Harris. Even I will, I just. And again, there's some contentions around Jordy P. And listen, like when I listen,
that's a sharp dude.
Yes, and when I listen to people like this, I don't listen to gospel. Like I'm not, drinking everything. Right. I take what I hear and I process it and I try to affect my own mindset, my own intellectual sort of, sort of override my own bias to try to see other angles. But at the end of the day, I may look at Jordy P. and say, I totally agree with 99% of what you said today, but that 1% I can't get behind.
Well, 99% of the stuff he says isn't absolutely concrete.
It's not.
Most of it is quite open.
It is.
And that's the beauty of it, that some people will look at it and take it as concrete, and they'll get right up in arms about it when he's just making a general question. Yeah. Most of it is questions. Interesting.
But he's got one of the worst personality traits you can have, and that he is honest and genuine, right? And he's just honest, and it is a very unpopular time to be. It just is. But I think the more of us stand up and actually have the stones to do it, we need more and more of that. And I think what you're starting to see in the public, on the social media or otherwise, what you are starting to see is people starting to understand that there's some different areas here that we have been, we went kind of too far the other way. So now they want to bring that back to the measured, on measured ground, so to speak, and really have, I guess, a more balanced approach to some of the issues that we're faced with. And you're starting to see the tides turn. Like you're starting to see it. It's quite interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
It goes far one way, it'll go far the other
Sure.
way. The universe is a funny way of unfolding, as it should.
It is, and it's cyclical, right?
It is.
In 100 years, they'll have the exact same issue.
Yeah.
It is what it is, but we'll be long gone by then.
So the other one I wrote down here was, okay, so you spent a fair bit of time in policing, in ERT.
Yeah.
You're in roles of higher stress, higher excitement, higher exhilaration, high reward for what you're doing, for effort out. What are you doing to replace that now?
Yeah, it's hard, I would say, but I would say what I miss the most is the thought process that goes behind solving tactical dilemmas. I just love to use my brain and to problem solve something that has only bad solutions. Right. Just which one of those is the less worse, and how we're going to mitigate the risk, and how we're going to be able to articulate taking a certain course of action, and how is that course of action justify, and all those things. So I really like the intricacies of doing that. I love doing that. I miss that a ton. And it's interesting because I will still get phone calls, not necessarily from my team, but I will, because they're very capable. But I will get phone calls sometimes from teams across the country that perhaps haven't had the same exposure and sometimes just to kind of run problems by me. And I love when people do that.
Right.
Because it keeps me thinking, it keeps me engaged in the problem solving realm. What I would say though is, in my life, I have driven absolutely everything I do into the ground. Everything. Moderation's for cowards. I don't believe in it. And when I wanted to be a SWAT team leader, I went all out and I stayed there for 13 years, 12 and a half years, so to speak. Well, yeah, I mean, and so I literally took that out of my system. I took it out of my system. Now, the one thing that I cannot put enough emphasis on is you can't let something define you.
Right.
If something defines you completely, let me rephrase that. Something may define you partially.
External.
And partially.
Right.
You have to have all these other pieces that also define you.
Right.
So when one of those pieces goes missing, you are capable of reorging and being the same person that you were. Use the experience that you've acquired at the time at which you were, involved in this engagement, but it doesn't destroy you. So one of the things that we see with old generations RCMPs, like the people with 30, 40 years of service, is that a lot of the times they feel they are nothing if they're not engaged. Right. And so the death rate of some of those members retiring, police officers, municipal or otherwise, are astronomical. Because the sense of purpose has kind of completely vanished and disappeared. And it couldn't be further from the truth.
Oh, absolutely.
It couldn't be further from the truth. But what we need to do is we need to start teaching our young officers and everybody, or firefighters or whoever engaged, what you are doing professionally does not define you. Those are all, it's part of who you are, and it's a part. If it goes away, just like anything else, you're going to reorg, regroup, and go again, and continue to be the person that you are and have a positive impact on others. So for me, one of the tiny little piece I always liked to be engaged in. I don't know how to. This is quite interesting. I don't generally lose, how to articulate certain things, but I'm having an issue with this. But it's essentially, if we act on the premise that I lived a warrior ethos since I was very, very young, either through martial arts or through my professional engagements or whatever the case may be. When I say warrior, I don't mean war in terms of necessarily, but just live a certain ethos. I carry it on now. I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt. I got it this year when I was retired.
Good
right?
For you.
Now I'm starting judo. Next week I'm going to wrap a white belt around my waist. This is my third pursuit of black belt over my course of my years engaged in martial arts. I am 45 years old, completely stoked and excited to go the judo route, and I'm going to get tossed over and over again. I'm going to learn the things, and it's going to be hard on my body and all these other things. But so now I've kind of redirected my energy. Now I want to be fully engaged in judo, right? And so I find all those things that are direct, almost, I would say, almost in line with what and how I've lived my life. And I will find as many of those things as I can, whether by way of working out and going on hikes. With, if we go on hikes with the family, I'll put a weight vest on, and I'm still in that mode. Like I'm going to drive this one into the ground. And when they do find my body, when it's all said and done, they will say this one is a done.
And if nothing left over.
And if there's ever an option to bring somebody back, they'll say not him. He's too beat up,
too worn out.
He's definitely done.
Oh man,
yeah.
I like that So I guess at the core, that warrior mindset is what defines you. Not so much the job, not so much the martial arts, not the leadership training, but the mindset or the drive of always trying to, the pursuit of excellence, essentially. Would that be fair?
Yeah, it would be. And I mean, let's get something straight. I never reached it anywhere, but
and no one does. And that's why they call it the pursuit of excellence.
Mm-hmm. And the line is consistently pushed, over and over and over, and that's the beauty of things. And we do so many things that we skim the surface on. And what you start understanding is that once you start going deeper into things, there is so much more enjoyment. One of the things that I do with my groups when I present, especially on the introspective leader course, is a simple exercise to illustrate how we're overthinking certain things. And I ask people, like, what do you like, dark or light coffee? And people will say, oh, I like dark, I like light. And then you generally ask why, and one of them will say, well, dark is stronger in caffeine or whatever, right?
Sure.
And so the reality is that, light coffee is not roasted nearly as much, so the grain are denser and generally negligibly higher in caffeine. And if you really want to increase your caffeine content, you're going to have to jack up the amount of coffee you're drinking, right? And so that's one piece. But the other piece to this, aside from the fact that most people think that dark coffee is actually stronger when it isn't, the other piece to this is the taste that you're after comes from the regions from where the coffee is coming. Mm-hmm. Because coffee beans take the taste of their environment. And so if you're going to Brazil, your coffee is nutty. If you're going into Ethiopia, your coffee tastes more like chocolate. And so, and then once you understand that there is a world there, what you start doing is you stop focusing on light or dark roast and you start looking at where's the coffee from? And what do I feel like today? Mm-hmm. Do I feel like vanilla hint, or do I feel like, and I'm being a total clown, but you know what I mean? Like whatever the case may be. And then you can really go down and explore coffees and regions. So imagine that you're traveling to Hawaii, you're traveling to Iceland, you're traveling to all these regions, and all you've ever said is, I want a dark coffee. You've missed out on, how many thousands of potentially incredible flavor of coffee. And so this is a really, really oversimplified process, and I'm not even touching the surface of it because I got, a very, rudimentary level coffee knowledge.
Right.
There's people having masters in coffee.
Sure. Some coffee sommelier.
Yeah, 100% there are. And so, but the beauty with this, and the beauty of the introspective leader course is that I believe that you can convey a message to people that this will not only make you a better leader, but it would also teach you to appreciate life more. I
would agree with that 100%.
It is absolutely amazing to go everywhere around the world and say, here's an Iceland coffee. Where does this grow? Mm-hmm. What does it taste like? It's light, dark, medium, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to try that. So now you try that and you're like, wow, that was absolutely amazing. Right? And we do that with absolutely everything. We tend to really, really say surface level. Even though information is readily available, more than in any other time in human history.
That's probably why we stay surface level, because
it's too easy to just find out.
It is, and there's so much information out there that the retention level of the information, it comes, it goes,
Sure.
Process. We today take in on a daily basis so much information that it can be completely overwhelming for most people, honestly, and it kind of puts them to a place of inaction.
And I love that. That's Hicks' Law, right?
Hicks' Law. I was just going to say that.
Yeah, having too many options and stifles your ability to make a call.
Right.
But here's what needs to happen, in my opinion, and what matters at the time right? And so the issue is, you're right, we're consistently bombarded by all those things, and we're doing it 24/7. Now, if I'm selecting coffee and I live in the moment, I'm selecting coffee right now. I'm not thinking about my phone call to Karen.
Right.
Right? And so if we have, and this comes down to mindfulness ultimately. And so if we have the ability to actually focus on the now and a little bit before and a little bit after, just, for good measure, we now can focus our attention to the now, and what is the decision that I'm making right now, and what is entailed in that decision, and and so it's not an overthinking process. It's like, it's useless information until you need it.
Right.
And there is it works hand in hand with the fact that our brains have the ability to retain. Listen, there's people out there that can recite an entire yellow phone book. There is no limit to how much information we can have. The problem is there is limit to our focus.
Right.
That's what the problem is. So you can have the information that you can use when convenient, but it's going to take you 10 minutes to understand how to select your coffee. That 10 minutes you just invested in years of coffee enjoyment.
Right.
To be used when you are selecting coffee, not when you're running your team meeting. Right?
Bunch of things that you brought up there. And, you might have to come on for another podcast if I can coerce you, just because I don't want to go too long for everybody here.
It's interesting though. People are listening to the long podcasts. It's completely insane. They break them down in pieces, and Jordan Peterson was talking about that. He says, you would think that a 3-hour podcast wouldn't be as successful. And he's like, they're the more successful.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe I got to start breaking it down into pieces here.
break the mold.
I've always gone for 45 minutes to an hour. My ethos behind the podcast always was and is, I want to bring something positive to people.
Sure.
I want to bring either entertainment or education or something that they can walk away with and say, I learned something, or I'm better for listening to it. So in that, I try to plan the podcast and plan the guests to bring value to the listener base. And I figure they're going to tune out after a certain point. So I've always looked at, maybe I'll just put it out there. Anybody listening who's made it this far, let me know. Okay. Let me know what you like to hear. Podcast at silvercore.ca. But when you're talking about what defines you, you're talking about when we look at when you're on the job and you come out and what you're doing for that excitement level, as well as living in the moment. A very good friend of mine, he's actually been on this podcast in the past, and he's talked about his SAS selection. He talked about his time British Army, and he was operating the 338 Lavoie over there. I used to say Lapua until I was schooled over at SHOT Show. They no, it's Lavoie. Okay.
Okay, guys.
At their booth. But he got into extreme alpinism, and he does that a fair bit. He's going through his ACMG mountain guide accreditation and all the rest, and found that as a very positive outlet for him, where he's now making those operational decisions in the mountain. He'll have a group that he'll be bringing up, and he's brought me up a number of times and definitely pushed my boundaries as well, and for the better. But it really forces you to be in the moment. And maybe that's a situation of unconscious coping, where as opposed to just being mindful, you're now forced to be mindful. Mm-hmm. When you're surfing, you're forced to be mindful in the moment. When you're rock climbing, you're forced to look at every time, every place you put your hand, every piece of gear that you put into a crack and check it.
It's outcome focused.
It is.
If you don't do it, something critical or dire could happen. Mm-hmm. And it's exactly the same with jiu-jitsu. Mm. It forces you to be in that role. If you're thinking about your office meeting or something else, your back just got taken.
But in all of that thinking, because I watched him as he goes through, and as he's getting older, and he's maturing in his alpinism and all the rest, and he's had some injuries, and seeing the thought process behind, like you look at the Uli Steck. I don't know if you've ever heard that name before, but in the alpinism world, kind of a big name, passed away a few years ago, but he had just record runs up a lot of very iconic mountains with little to no gear and in just like no time at all. But at some point of pushing, and driving things like you do with the different activities you get into, you reach a point of diminishing returns. And in Uli's case, he's no longer around anymore. He had a fall on one of his trips, not adequate protection. That mental management process and that mindset of knowing enough, like what is enough? When do you have enough? Do you find that difficult when you start getting into these different endeavors that you get into? Like, what is a cap? When am I going to be happy? What's enough?
Well, I'm going to reframe the question for you.
Okay.
Was that gentleman going to a destination, or is the journey that he enjoyed?
Which one, Uli? Or
yeah, Uli. I mean, it's the journey that he truly enjoyed.
Right.
He wasn't going anywhere. Right. So now let's take Uli with the same fire inside of him, and let's sit him on a porch for the last 30 years. Actually, let's sit him on a porch at the time of death and say, we just extended your life 30 years and you can sit here and watch the birds and the cars go by.
And then say, hell no.
And then go back and say, okay, look, we're going to return you 30 years before, but on one of those climbs, you're going to be done. You would pick that. I can guarantee it.
For somebody like that, I would have to agree.
100%. So for me, we're acting, and this is just... It's just a societal thing, and I think it just has to do with the fact that we're so comfortable, right? If you were in Somalia right now, grew up there, you wouldn't be thinking that far in advance because you've seen people die left, right, and center incessantly at every day. So your outlook would be very, very different. We're seeing death as this big monster. None of us is coming out of this alive. None of us is. Like, this isn't a destination type thing. This is a journey. And he died doing what he loved the most. It would have been no different for me if I was dying doing some tactical operation, hopefully, but not some completely stupid that I did.
Sure.
Or somebody else did that. Now they have to live with that. But if we were to take all the complexity outside, out of it and say, okay, you stood up for what you felt was right at a time at which somebody needed to step up, and you, like many before you, have sacrificed your life. Sign me up. Sign me up.
Very good point.
I just think that longevity versus intensity. I'll take intensity of my life, and that's just
every man dies, not every man truly lives.
That's just how I feel about it. I just truly think that if he was given the choice, he probably would have picked the same choice.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, one last thing I have here.
Yeah.
I was actually going to start with this, but we kind of went through in a route here. But when I look at the podcast that you've been doing recently, I see the number of podcasts and places that you've been speaking. It strikes me that it's similar to working out. It's similar to jiu-jitsu, and that you're training for something. Am I correct in that casual observation? Are you training for something?
A podcast marathon.
your own podcast, or to be on certain podcasts, hopefully in the future, or do you have a goal in that?
I mean, it would be semi-disingenuous to say I don't have a goal. I mean, my goal is always to get better.
Right.
And I like to have conversations. I love to have conversations, especially productive two-way, bilateral conversations. And I like to do it because I know that I have an ability to generally connect with people. So I know that there is value to it. So I really enjoy doing that. And I don't overstate the value of it. I don't think I'm critically important or anything like that. But what I do think is that there are certain conversations that ought to be had that we're not having, that I would love to be a part of. And if going on bigger and bigger platform is something that's down the road for me, I would love that. I would love that. But here's the other thing, and that's something that surprised quite a few people, but I also would be totally okay with going on a podcast and not speak about policing at all.
Right.
At all. Like
Yep.
I can have conversations about a million different things, and I'm not suggesting that during an entire 3-hour podcast I'm not going to refer to an experience that I had
Sure.
or something, because it's been a part of me for so long and it's taught me some valuable lessons. But in terms of the actual topic, it could be absolutely anything. I just love to have conversations, and being on podcasts really feels good. Like I love to do it. I love to do it. I think it's. And so people have suggested, maybe you should have your own and all these other things. I really don't want to do any editing, and I don't think I'm that great of an interviewer, to be honest with you. And maybe I become better, or but I just kind of prefer being a guest, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it does. When I started this podcast, I hadn't listened to really any podcast prior. I was on a podcast. A friend of mine had me on his podcast. He's got a local business here, and he's teaches new hunters, and that was fun. And then I went down. I saw Steve Ranella, who's got a Netflix show called Meat Eater, and he's
I follow the show.
Oh, okay,
I
fair
watch
enough.
Joe Rogan and everything. I just love the show.
So got to meet Steve and Janice and a few of the other people on there, and actually became good friends with one of the people who's with Meat Eater there. And I thought, well, this is kind of neat, but entirely outside my comfort zone. I've got ADHD. I have a conversation up until a point where I lose interest, and usually that's why I just get up and walk away. I mean, so this has been, for me, something to share my positivity, and it's been a very positive outlet to try and support others in who have similar interests. And I've specifically not called this the Meat Eater podcast or the Firearms podcast, because those are only small portions of things that interest me. And it's kind of, in some ways, it can be detrimental in the short term, because people look at the title and are like, what the hell am I going to be listening to here? But I'm hoping that in the long term, the breadth of the guests and the breadth of what we're bringing in with the underlying positivity, as well as we do this, I can feel myself very slowly getting a little bit better and less ums and ahs and better able to engage. So similar to where you're at, not only as a positive thing, I've found the podcast to be a challenge and something that requires constant study, constant concentration, research on people. How do I engage better, or better equipment, or whatever it might be? So it's definitely a different experience hosting the podcast than being on a podcast as a guest. But I don't know. I think if you ever do want to take on that challenge, I think you would do very, very well at it.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that a few times, and it's almost like something in me says, now is not the time type deal. Like it just
Trust your gut.
Yeah, and the reason why I really, really believe that is that I've pretty much run my life like this, and it's always paid dividend. And sometimes I could be having this conversation with you, and tomorrow morning I'm ready to have my own podcast.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it changes really quickly.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, the time is right. Knuckle down and let's get this done. So it will be interesting. Right now, of course, I'm floating, right? And living very organically since retiring from a very structured and regimented, lifestyle over the course of my military and then RCMP career. Essentially, I've been institutionalized for the better part of my adult life. And so now I'm learning to, do things very organically, and I really enjoy it. So we'll see. It's not outside the realm of possibility. I would love to hit, the Jordan Peterson, the Joe Rogans, the Jocko. If there's if I can contribute something, if there's a feeling, a true feeling that I can contribute something positive.
Right.
And that's that. I wouldn't want to just go there just to go there. You look at me, I'm on the Jocko podcast, and what am I talking about? Well,
Right.
Whatever.
Oh, you'd look back and you wouldn't be proud of that.
No, exactly. So, yeah.
Very cool. So maybe we'll just wrap this up with, if we did another podcast, what if you could do a podcast about anything, pull it out of a magic box and say, this is what we're going to talk about. what would you want to talk about?
Wow, that's a tough one. If we could do a podcast on absolutely anything.
Or would that just change day by day, depending on what's currently?
No. There is so many subjects and so many things that I'm interested in. And I think we have a vested interest in absolutely everything that surrounds us, right? And so we could talk about, kids and raising them, and we could talk about outdoors and we could talk about travel, and we could talk about, the animals, and the list just goes on and on. Animals might get weird though. Here it's a hunting podcast, right? So we'll leave the animals out of there. But
you know what I think would be fun to talk about?
What?
Your new business and starting it, the challenges of running a business.
Sure.
The other thing that'd be kind of interesting, because I got a sense, I could be wrong, but I think there's a spirituality to the martial arts and to you and what you do and how that guides the mental management process, which we didn't even touch on. Mm-hmm. And I think that whole aspect would be a very interesting one to talk about. But maybe we just put a pin in this one for now and go get some food.
Yeah, man. I'm up for a spirituality podcast down the line. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for being on this podcast.
Standing,